everybody on schedule, I think we'll go ahead and start. My name is Larry Carlberg. I'm the director here at the General Lew Wallace Study Museum. And each year we do a different annual exhibit. And for 2016, we have been looking at the golden age of Indiana authors, which starts primarily with Lew, although there had been a very famous poet from Indiana, a lady named Sarah Bolton, in the 1850s and 60s, who was very well remembered. And you all have heard the title of her poem, Paddle Your Own Canoe. Went across the country and was very famous. So she had some significance in the publishing industry. Come in and find a seat. Publishing industry before the golden age really got underway in 1880 with Ben-Hur. But it ran almost 50 years, and as well as many of the authors that wrote novels and big books, there were a lot of poets. James Whitcomb Riley, clearly, but others like Ken Hubbard and folks that wrote some very interesting, in some very interesting ways. So this year we've been kind of looking at that because of this bicentennial for the state of Indiana. And one of the neat things that landed on our radar was a Poet Laureate for the state of Indiana. We thought that would be a cool thing to do. And so we contacted Shari, and she could not have been any more excited about coming. It was really nice. We didn't have to twist arms or anything. So anyway, we were just tickled that she had an opening in her schedule that she could come. We've done a lot of programs this year, kind of under the umbrella of the Festival of the Word, recognizing all of these ways that the written word has impacted Indiana through the Golden Age. And we have one more event coming after this, and it's a little bit different. It's an author fair that's going to be on Small Business Saturday here in the Carriage House. And we've got
Five, maybe six
authors, actually from around the state, not just from Crawfordsville, although most of them are kind of out of this region. So kind of keep that on your radar. It's November 26th. 26th. It's a Saturday, Small Business Saturday here, so that will be the last event in our programming year this year. A little bit about Shari, who is the 2016-2017 Poet Laureate for the state of Indiana. She's the fifth one in a line of Poet Laureates. It is not something that you get for lifetime. But she has done a number of important works. She has had poems appear, and I'm reading off of her website. The North American Review, Shenandoah, the Black Warrior Review, the Indiana Review, Poetry East, all sorts of journals and scholarly publications. She's been nominated 3 times for pushcart prizes, and she's been awarded 2 Creative Renewal Fellowships from the Arts Council of Indianapolis, so very accomplished. She's taught creative writing and memoir writing to people of all ages and backgrounds. She's talked in grade schools, colleges, libraries, museums, community centers, nursing homes, and great literary centers now like Ben-Hur. She was born in Goshen and actually raised in Wells County, and I guess that has really been the inspiration for a lot of your writing in under the tree canopies, because she was raised on 10 acres that I guess were heavily forested in Wells County. She's married. Her husband teaches at Brebeuf, in Indianapolis, and is also a poet, I believe. So there's a lot of creativity in that household. With no further ado, I will turn the floor over to Shari.
Thank you, Larry, for that nice introduction, and I'm so delighted to be here this evening. I'm glad Larry mentioned Sarah Bolton. I feel particularly close to Sarah because it was a poetry literature celebration at Crown Hill Cemetery, and I got to dress up as her and speak as her and read Paddle Your Own Canoe. So I feel, close to her spirit in that way. I'm often asked, what is an Indiana Poet Laureate? And I think of myself as being an ambassador for poetry, promoting the reading and writing of it throughout the state, and also our wonderful poets that we have. And some of them are here tonight, I see, Mark and Gwen, and I'm sure there are others too.
Josh.
Oh, great. Who's Josh?
Josh.
Oh, okay, great. I'll talk to you. I'm continually learning of new wonderful poets here. So, Larry mentioned my husband, Chuck Wagner, and that he's also a poet, and he's actually written a poem about Lew Wallace, and I haven't yet. I do plan to do that. But I thought I would begin with his poem. And tonight I'm going to concentrate on poems that are about historical men and women from Indiana. I've written a lot about places and also some memoir poems, but I'm working on a collection that's all about different men and women from Indiana history. And also in my book, The Harmonist at Nightfall, there's quite a few poems about Indiana people too. So, but Chuck was inspired when we came here by that photograph of Lew Wallace beneath his beech tree riding Ben-Hur. And also when we were just, there's this kind of synergy that happens, I think, when a poem begins in your head. Things start happening that work together. And as we were just walking around Crawfordsville, he saw this young woman like perched on this second floor window. We were kind of worried she might fall out. She was just kind of sitting there on the window frame. But that photograph and walking around the study and learning about Lew Wallace and that girl just perched up there, it all came together in his poem. Under the Ben-Hur Beach, a photograph of Lew Wallace. The tree is no longer there, except in this black and white photograph of an old Victorian perched in stiff-backed repose beneath the shade of its branches. A tuft of white corn silk obscures his mouth and chin, his starched collar clasped tight under the impregnable weight of a dark wool suit that mocks the summer heat. The soldier planning his next campaign amidst a camp whose perimeter is secured against the encroach of sunlight or the coming century. His chair rests on a wooden platform, a raft from which he casts the arcing line and hook of his thought into a pool so serene he can glimpse shapes gliding underneath the surface. And perhaps his hook holds fast to the image of a woman lounging in the heat of a mid-July morning, her face and arms flushed with color, the folds of her dress billowed by a sudden breeze, her hand clutching the frame of a second-floor window, where her languid body balances like foam on the brim of a glass. And perhaps the light from her smile triggers the sun to seep through the crevices of his sable tent and collect like coins in the upturned well of his top hat. Now the sleepy pool surges with a current that carries him to some Dead Sea shore, to the courtyard of a wealthy Judean, and as he peers upward through sun-squinted eyes, he sees her straddling an escarped terrace, her hands leaning on weathered tiles as the Roman governor rides through the street below. Well, the closest person to here that I've written about so far is Mordecai Three Finger Brown. He lived in Niceville, and I Google mapped, and he lived only 30 miles from here. So how many of you have heard of Mordecai Three Finger Brown? Oh, you read a book about him?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I have it.
Oh, you haven't read it? Well, you'll want to read it when you get home. He was amazing baseball player. He's in the Hall of Fame, but a lot of people don't know about him. He's been forgotten quite a bit. So one of the things I'm trying to do with these poems is bring back some of these people. Mordecai got his his nickname Three Finger because of a farm accident. But I've read that it wasn't really an accident. That's what it says in the Hall of Fame. And but on the website, there's it's a website by, like, I think it was his nephew or great nephew, who said he was dared by his older brother to put his hand into the corn picker or corn shredder.
No way.
And so that's what happened. And I'll show you a picture of his. Well, here's a picture of him. He's a pitcher, and how important your hand is. He pitched with that hand. And it gave him an amazing curve. And so he was right up there with Christy Mathewson. He was really good. And I just discovered that my new son-in-law, he is related to Mordecai Three-Finger Brown. So not a blood relative, but like his aunt is married to I think a nephew or a great nephew or something like that. So this is in trying to find the voice of Mordecai. Mordecai Three-Finger Brown tells all, and the epigraph is from the Baseball Hall of Fame. Tagged with the nickname Three Finger because he lost part of his index finger in a farm machinery accident in his youth, Mordecai Brown was one of the best National League pitchers in the early 20th century. They still get it wrong. It was no accident. I was 5 and knew what a shredder could do to a stalk of corn. Truth is, I fed my right hand straight in because my brother dared me. Even then, I couldn't let anyone get the best of me. At 14, I handled a hammer pick at the coal mine in Niceville, Indiana. But I yearned to swing a bat and breathe the pure dust of a diamond. For years, I pitched stones till I could strike every knothole in the barn where the last light slid through. When I finally took the mound, I threw overhand, underhand, or sidearm, but always with an odd swerve that dipped and baffled even Ty Cobb, who called my curveball the most devastating he ever faced. Strike after strike, I matched the Giants' Christy Mathewson, and when I'd switch hit from good hand to bad, which was which, reporters asked. In 1908, after the Cubs won our second World Series, this is good timing. My uncle retired his corn shredder early, parking it in the lawn of the Niceville Town Hall. But I pitched till they released me at age 39, and still I threw and coached for 10 more years, stepping up at 51 to strike out 9 straight batters from the House of David. At my Texaco station in Terre Haute, I talked while I pumped or wiped windshields with my pitching hand. Be a switch hitter, I advised my youngest customers. Meet whatever life throws. Startle every expectation. What others called mangled gave me a firmer grip. Well, I am really excited right now because the Indiana Repertoire Theater, you might have heard of their production Finding Home, which has the music of Tim Grimm family, his original songs, which are wonderful, but it also tells the story through poetry and through scenes, skits, monologues, and this poem is in it, both the Gold Nights and the Blue Nights. And it's a poem in the voice of Madam C.J. Walker, and Kim Staunton is the actress, and she is so good at it. I kind of, it's hard reading it because she is so much better at reading it. But Madam C.J. Walker has, her story is just really, I find very fascinating and just unbelievable almost. And to do research for this, I read her descendants, I think it's like great-great-great-granddaughter or something like that. Alelia Bundles has a wonderful biography of her, so I read that first. And but Madam C.J. Walker, whose other name is Sarah Breedlove, she was born in 1867 and died in 1919, and she was America's first made female millionaire. And her parents were born slaves in Louisiana, and then when they were freed, they became sharecroppers. And so Sarah was born in Louisiana, but at a very young age, her parents died. And well, you'll find out in the poem. But she eventually moved to Indianapolis, and if you've seen she built her factory there, and also if you've been to the Madam C.J. Walker Theater on Indiana Avenue, that was built with her money. So the poem is called Sarah's Exodus. I was born in a sharecropper's shack with no windows and a dirt floor. But when Mama twisted my hair in ribbons made from rags, I knew I was the picture of Pharaoh's daughter who found the baby Moses all alone in a cotton field. When Mama died, I missed the tug of her fingers on my hair, their firm resolve. My sister's twisting was too loose. She married a brute who beat me with his fist and cursed my hair that fell in clumps, like I was an ugliness not worth holding on to. I escaped when I turned 14 and married a man named Moses. But the sea that should have parted spread its blood-stained sheet, leaving me a widow, nursing a child whose crown I kissed to make it real. In St. Louis, lye soap burned my forearms raw, but I toiled past midnight, hunched over an iron tub, so Lelia could have food and schooling. I scrubbed in that sweltering fog till one night when the Lord delivered a dream. An African angel man who anointed my scabby scalp with Madam C.J. Walker's wonderful hair grower. He handed me the recipe, and I stood up. I stood up and pulled other washerwomen, stooped over rusty tubs, into a door-to-door force, selling on commission. I built my factory in Indianapolis and swam in money I would have sunk under if I had clutched, but my hands were open. I never forgot the bruised bodies hanging beneath magnolia leaves, or the bent-over women washing taffeta and lace with never anything pretty for themselves. Once I dreamed of brushing Mama's hair, and as I brushed, her sparse hair grew thick and curled out the door down the street, so that people gasped, and still I stroked, till blackness shone like the sea Moses parted, and I began to braid. There's also a trio of voices in one of the scenes, and they took part of my poem Apologia, which is in the voice of Jean Stratton-Porter, and then also excerpts from my poem about Alice Gray, Diana and the Dunes, that I'll recite a little bit after this one. And then Scott Sanders Russell's had submitted some writing that about Rachel Peden, who was a farm wife and columnist, wonderful writer. So these three women, nature was all really important to them, so that's what brings them together. So the one version of this poem is in my Harmonist at Nightfall, Poems of Indiana, but the IRT asked me to put an owl in on the stage. It's a story about when Jean Stratton-Porter was in her house in Geneva by the Limberlost, and she needed to photograph an owl, and she heard the owl at her window that night. Her deadline was like the next day, and she didn't know how she was going to get the picture in time. She heard him out in the orchard, and so she imitated the call. She was wonderful at imitating the calls, and the owl flew in the kitchen. So they wanted the owl in it. So I had her, I rewrote it with her talking to the owl. And then they have like 40 writers that they asked work from. And they were all already using Madame Walker, so they used, excerpts from it, and it works really well. And I'm glad, I wrote this version too, because it's a fun one to read in front of audiences. So this is, and if you might not, you might think of just Jean Stratton-Porter as a novelist. She was, Gwen was, she's up there? Okay, good. Yeah, because Gwen was showing me how the golden age for Indiana literature was in the early part of the 1900s, and we were second place with New York City. And part of that reason was because Jean Stratton-Porter. She was the best-selling woman novelist, and of course there were other people too. But besides being a novelist, and she said she wrote her novels so she would have money to do her nature studies. She was a fantastic photographer and also a nature writer too. I love her book, What I Have Done with Birds. It's just incredible what Will like that owl flying in her kitchen, and perching on her kitchen chair. She had a way with birds. And I was talking with Larry in the study about, whether we don't know whether she actually met Lew Wallace, but she's a great admirer of his, and that story about the strawberry, about he sent her white strawberries. I hadn't heard that, so it's wonderful. But they remind me of each other, their energy, both of them, and all the different things they could do. She's also could paint. She could do about everything too. So, and she's a musician. They would, I think, got along quite well together. So this poem is called Apologia, because she's apologizing to this owl. Forgive me, Mr. Screech Owl, for leading you on. You must have thought you were swooping into a cozy boudoir, and here you are, among the pots and pans. Let me make it clear, like a suitor in a fairy tale, I would have crossed the Limberlost to find you. I would have scaled shaky extension ladders and stepped through switchgrass where Massasaugas slither. I would have gone bearing a box camera and tripod through ankle-deep muck with a veil of gnats clinging to my breath. I'd have gone wearing breeches and buckled-in boots to wild places no other lady in Geneva would set foot. But tonight, sir, I heard your quivering whistle in my backyard, and since you were the very bird I needed, I lifted the window sash and simulated moonlight with pasteboard and a candle. I crouched beneath the window, calling back till you and I fashioned a courtship song of cedar-scented forest and flickering moths, of lonesome hollows and old pine, of what favors the darkness and is misunderstood. We wove a tight duet till suddenly my heart stood still. Pardon my ruse. Though you flew into my kitchen, you are no fool. Like me, you followed your heart, and who knows where a heart may lead. I think you must be a sign from the universe that I'm traveling the right path, for just when I need your portrait for an article, you're here, perched on a chair, your tufted face so near I could stroke it with my hand. But I won't. You can trust me. Just as you are no harbinger of doom, I am no femme fatale. I will never reduce you to a feather in my hat. Tomorrow, I will photograph and sketch you, but I am not that breed of naturalist who believes he must shoot a bird to make its close acquaintance. Unlike that rascal Audubon, I will not wire your wings in a natural pose. No, that's not my way. The secret to my success has been learning another language, bringing small gifts, proving I will do no harm. Lessons I learned as a child, making my solitary rounds through orchard and forest and barn, checking the welfare of every nest. Mr. Owl, rest easy in this kitchen. Tomorrow at dusk, I will open the back door and bid you return to what you sing of, with the passion of the linnet and the lark. Well, I mentioned Alice Gray. How many of you have heard of Alice Gray? Oh, okay. I think of her as kind of our Thoreau of Indiana. She was an she worked for an astrophysics magazine in Chicago. She was wonderful with mathematics. She worked in a basement of a building, and she said she never saw the stars, and she decided she's just going to change her life and live a solitary existence on the dunes. And she's one of the first people that spoke up and saw the need to protect the dunes. We have some of her writings that were in the Chicago newspaper, but a lot of her journal she kept has been lost. And when I wrote this poem, I found out about her through Haunted Indiana books. I found out a lot of interesting people through those books. And so when I wrote the poem, there wasn't a biography written about her, and I tried to make it as historical as I thought, but since I wrote the poem, there has been a book come out about her by Janet Edwards. There's still a lot of questions about her, but I will say, this uses a lot of folklore and myth. She got the name Diana of the Dunes because she was caught skinny dipping. It's in my, this one is in my first book, Evening Chore. Oh, I'm going to try saying it by heart, but I want to find it just in case I need to look. And I want to read the epigraph, too. From Haunted Indiana by Mark Merriman, because I speak in it as her ghost. Over the years, more than one person has reported seeing a ghostly figure of a woman emerging nude from the surf, only to vanish in the air before their eyes. I had constraints enough in those other lives. From the knob of Mount Tom, I still shudder at the faint corona of Chicago, and how for 35 years Okay, maybe I'm going to read this. I said it okay in the car. Okay, for 35 years, I burrowed through boxes until buried in a basement office, honing paragraphs on astrophysics, I never viewed the stars. When I flung in 1915, the hourglass meant to gauge an old maid's waning time, I saw in the splinters a vision of shifting sand and swirls of constellations. Byron's words in solitude, "We are least alone," pierced my insulated world like a gull's sharp cry. At first, it was me, a blanket and some books, in a wilderness where I slept in leeward swales and ate wild strawberries from hillocks inching inland at the pace glaciers slide. But that same summer, a fisherman saw me skinny dip in the gray-lipped surf, and afterward rumors grew how I was a dark-haired beauty, fleet-footed, who fled with white-tailed deer and slept among the herd. Wives had a different version. I was a siren who fled behind foredunes to let myself be caught by any man I could bewitch. The scent of marram grass clung to their clothes. In winter, when a wife steamed the window of my shack with wrathful breath, I bought a gun. Later, I took pot shots at those who would snatch my story for a byline. Byron's words held heavy irony as I trudged steep slopes where sand absorbed my prints. I was bathing in a kettle hole, a glacial pocket, when the carpenter from Laporte tracked me down. He pulled the soiled clipping from his coat that told the world Diana of the Dunes was Alice Mabel Grey. He smoothed it with his large hand as if it were a certificate to seal our fate. That afternoon, we honeymooned beneath the tamaracks, and he vowed to guard the privacy of our domestic bliss. While he fashioned furniture from vines thick as his forearms, I sold boxes of driftwood to those who couldn't believe someone so plain had been a legend. The first time he hit me, I understood. After all, everyone pointed at him when a strangled body washed up on our beach. Indigents, they called us. But no one proved his guilt, and the beatings grew more severe. He kept hemming in tighter and tighter the walks I took until he moved us into town, where I no longer heard the breaking waves or that low hum shifting sand sing, a bow drawn across taut strings. 10 years after seeking a hermitage, I died in childbirth. The doctor who saw the bruises said complications and drew up the sheet. No one noticed I was buried, not in the solitary space my parents paid for, but in a mass grave mixed with other bones. At least there was no box to burrow through. But clearly I couldn't keep house with all those restless souls wringing restless hands. But clearly I couldn't keep house with all those lost souls wringing restless hands until resurrection morning. So I came back here to these sand-covered moraines where a glacier set down its burden of debris. Having broken free from society's stranglehold, I am as resilient as the deer. Solitude is an illusion, I whisper to children, who suddenly fear the mound of sand others have pressed around them. Well, I don't know. I have the nerve to try that again. But, well, I'll also share with you one of my favorite historical people, Christina Sullivan, which I bet none of you here have heard of her. she comes from LaGrange County, and up there they still remember her. And you won't find her in the history book. She was called the Skunk Lady of Howe. But, like I was so happy to hear in their corn school parade in LaGrange, somebody dressed up as her. And I know they've written plays about her, and she's a beloved character there. And what I admire about her, she had such a way with animals. And I first learned about her through my grandmother, who, she was a Mennonite farm wife, but when they retired, she and Grandpa moved to Howe. And she told me how she had met Chrissy when she was a little girl, and went into her house and saw the menagerie of animals that she had, including skunks, and her dirt floor, and then she always, well, I'll leave that for the end. I don't want to give away the end of the poem. But anyway, she was called the Skunk Lady because the town paid her to catch the skunks in the graveyard, because they would dig up the fresh graves because it was easy to get the grubs. So, but she wouldn't hurt them. She would take them home with her. And I have a picture of Chrissy with her skunk. But she'd also have possums and cats and snakes and all kinds of animals in her house. That's another one. And always, from all accounts, too, she had a very cheerful disposition. And she did make some money by singing and dancing with the skunks on her shoulders. And people from Chicago, well, this is before Remember television, and people from Chicago would come down to see her and her skunks. And also her fame grew when in Elkhart a store put up, if you want to see the dirtiest woman in the world, go to Howe, Indiana. So, and that kind of embarrassed the people of Howe, as you'll find out in this. The Skunk Lady. On Sunday afternoons, they circled as if to cage me, but I fooled them. I shuffled the shoes of my last husband and sang Over the River Charlie till I was gone to feed my sheep on buckwheat cakes and barley. Here's a cigarette, Chrissy, some gent would cut in, and I'd puff till I was so dizzy he'd give me one more. They pitched pennies, the louder I laughed, the higher I lifted my black woolen skirt. I wore skunks on my shoulders, but they never stunk. They purred and were soft as sable from the plume of their tail to dark arrowed head. Harsh light squelched their eyes, but the night fired them red as they rooted through raked gardens and dug the grubs in fresh graves. The town paid me to catch them, but I never hurt a one. I carried them home from the churchyard like the men I gentled who gambled and drank, then drew near to me in the straw. I loved my husband so fiercely it stopped the sun, till with the smash of a bottle they'd hit the road or make a bad end, like the tinker who mended umbrellas. When every bowed shaft and rib was straightened, he laid down on the tracks. His were the shoes I wore to dance. No one knew my strength came from dirt, caked under my fingernails, matted to burrs in my hair. It took a town to wash it all out. Embarrassed by the herd of picnickers I drew, they burned my straw bed, my shack, and my shoes. They built me a house with a floor I could mop, and stuffed my skunks in sacks bound for the river. When wives brought bars of soap and a comb's bone teeth, I knew the end was near. Don't take in strays, they told me, closing the door. An old stomach ailment, men said a month later as they shoveled my hole. But it was that cage of cleanliness that laid me low, a pale body betrothed to the dirt. my grandmother always said that she died of cleanliness. That's what she said. But her story reminds me of Proteus, the son of Poseidon, who, when Hercules fought with him, you know, every time he threw him to the ground, he just came up stronger. But finally figured out that he was getting his strength from the dirt. And so to defeat him, he held him above his head. But I am drawn to these, many of these people that somehow they seem mythic or like a fairy tale. Like Diana of the Dunes, well, hers was clearly linked there to Greek mythology. But there's one woman, Polly Barnett, who searched more than 30 years for her daughter who disappeared. She was like Demeter, searching for Persephone. Even when people told her her daughter had died, she would not stop looking till her trail formed a circle through 5 counties in southern Indiana. Well, here's a poem I'm going to read. It's not in the voice of the character now. I have some persona poems in the Harvest at Nightfall, but others that, like this one, that are just about the character. But this one's James Dean's Grave. And this was one of the first poems I wrote in this collection. I went all over the state to different places that just seemed to be calling me. Before I had this project, I just was keeping a folder of clippings from the Star about different places that I wanted to visit. I wasn't really thinking of writing a poem about them. But then I guess I was coming up with an idea for an application for a creative renewal fellowship with the Arts Council of Indianapolis, and I thought, oh well, that would be a fun project to do. And it was a great project too, because my daughters were both young, and we went as a family. So in the summers, we were out in the woods a lot, went to a lot of state parks and historical places. But one of my clippings was about James Dean's grave, because I had read how every week somebody goes out there to wipe the lipstick off his gravestone. He's buried in Fairmount Cemetery. James Dean was born in was Marion or Fairmount. His parents were from that area, but then they moved out to California. But then when James's mother died, and he was still quite young, his father sent him to live with his uncle and aunt on a farm just outside of Fairmount. And so he helped with the farming, and he went to the Quaker church, which is near the farm, and there's still the place where you can see where he bought his first motorcycle. And one thing that helped with this poem, I mentioned how, like with the Chuck's poem, that great happenstance of seeing the girl up there on the window frame of the window. For this poem, we took a wrong turn, or I took a wrong turn because I was driving, and instead of going to the outside of town to find the cemetery, I went into town. And but it was fortuitous because downtown there was a man looked like a farmer with his hands in his pockets and kind of leaning kind of in a James Dean pose. And there was a poster of James Dean in the same similar pose above him. And so it was really, the universe telling me, look here. James Dean didn't get that pose in California. Then the poem kind of wrote itself. And I have the epigraph from the museum there in town where I went, and this is a quote from James Dean. 40 acres of oats made a huge stage, and when the audience left, I took a nap, and nothing got plowed or harrowed. Where is the boy with bongo drums and a matador's cape, with a fire-red motorcycle racing through dust and fingers smeared by chalk or clay. He's not here. He's not hovering over silk flowers in a stone smack full of rose-tinted kisses. He's not fawning over cold cigarette butts or unfolding love notes from strangers. He doesn't care a hoot about staying where he's supposed to, lodged among rows of graves and accessible to those who chip and shove shards of headstone into a purse. The boy who slept for years with a piece of his mother's funeral wreath pressed beneath his pillow would understand the need to hold on to something. But those of you who seek him, he's not here. Better to fill your purses with chaff, for he's gone into the fields. And if he's not pounding ground with the beat of rain, then he's riding hell-bent over harrowed earth, stirring up dust. Or just look for him in the solitary frame of a farmer, shoulders slouched, hands in his pockets, his worn boots scuffing the crusted snow. Time's going by, at least quickly for me, not for you. I also have a poem here about the Wright brothers. I mean, we hear about Kitty Hawk, we hear about, we associate them with Ohio, but actually, they spent a lot of time growing up here in Indiana, and a lot of things they learned in Indiana went into the discovery of their flight. And their mother was important too. I went to Millsville, where Wilbur was born, and that's really interesting if you haven't been there, and learned how their mother was had a kind of engineering mind, and she would always make them the best sleds and the things that they used from the sled in how to steer their plane. And kites, she really had aerodynamic ways with kites, and they learned things from that, and Wilbur learned things from watching the turkey vultures, and so I found that interesting. So I recreated that, and they didn't want to move to Ohio. They wanted to stay in Indiana, and Wilbur was just ready to graduate from high school, and then they moved to Ohio. So this is imagining, the day before they have to leave to go to Ohio, and they loved to ride bicycles near Richmond. They lived in Richmond. Outside of that, and in fact, they learned a lot about how to create their airplane through what they knew about bicycles. First flight, Richmond, June 1884. It quivered in the roll and turn as Orville banked a curve, spun from his hubs downhill to the river, and a dream caught in Will's spokes too as he pedaled to the rear, reading the cursive of turkey buzzards, how they'd coast with wings extended, feather tips twisted to balance on air. Something tugged them both away from their mother, wasted, balsa wood thin, delicate as the kite frames she helped them build, their pockets packed with pennies and love notes, the ballast of loss. They raced what snapped at their heels, tomorrow's move to Ohio. Under cirrus clouds, dirt roads flew beneath them, spokes twirled like a whirligig's blades, like a flyer's spruce propellers to lift them to the sky. I have a lot of poems in here about Native Americans. I'm particularly interested in Native American culture and history. I worked for several years in Louisiana for a community of Choctaws, researching their history for federal recognition. And I grew up, near where actually in my town I've learned there was a village, of Miami. And but at the time when I was in Louisiana, I didn't even know about much about the Native American history there, and that there were still many Native American people here. It wasn't until I was at a conference in Washington, D.C. for the Choctaws that I was working with that I met the Miamis here. And then, so I started getting interested in the history here. So I'll read one about, I'll just read a short one about Chief Shipshawana. And this is just a short one, but there were some Native Americans once they, pushed back to Kansas or Oklahoma, they came back. And he slipped back, he walked all the way back at night. And then he lived about a year after he came back. And he's who the town Shipshawana is named after. And he was a chief of the Potawatomi band. And of course the town is named after him. And there's, the epigraph is taken from his monument near Shipshawana Lake. And so the Potawatomi removal is also called the Trail of Death because so many, especially children, died of typhoid along the way. The chief was removed from this reservation September 4th, 1838, and was escorted to Kansas by a company of soldiers. He returned in 1839 and died in 1841. A French priest gave me the name Peter the Great, but to the Potawatomi I was still vision of a lion, and that was enough to guide me back in the dark, where I met my shadow, pacing the burnt shoreline where the village stood. Sycamores creaked in their old winter bones. I remembered the emptiness of Kansas, the wind with nowhere to rest its head. I stepped into my shadow, and we slipped where no one could break us apart, like otter beneath a lodge of ice. I'll read one more because I want to leave some time for just questions. Let me see which. I think I'll end with one of the Levi and Catherine Coffin House, because I have some poems about the Underground Railroad in here too, and these two people are two of my heroes. In Fountain City, you can tour their house. Levi, it's been called the conductor of the Underground Railroad. He and Catherine, thousands of refugees, fugitive slaves, came through their house here and also in Ohio. And I thought it was really cool too that after the Civil War, they went up to Canada and to visit these people that had gone through their house, and they wrote letters to them too. But the house was designed so to really offer a good haven for the fugitives coming through. Levi and Catherine Coffin House, Fountain City. This house is a testament to that which calls a man to rise from slumber and descend the dark stairwell, opening the door to a blast of cold wind and the fugitive whose shackled, frostbit feet he bends down to rub near the fire. This house is a witness to that which moves a woman to stoke the cast iron stove in a kitchen below her kitchen, to haul water from a secret well, to make each stitch fine and tight, as if the path to freedom might be secured by the diligence of her needle. And this house is a vow given by a husband and wife to cleave to the sacred within the stranger, to sleep despite threats of a hurled torch, to enter the desperate dreams of those who rest a fortnight in an attic, its door hidden by the headboard of their own bed. So do you have any questions that you might have about any of the
You've written these wonderful biographical poems. How did you choose biography for the central theme of your work?
Well, I guess I love stories, and they're all about stories, biography. Well, the Harvest at Nightfall really started with being focused on place more, and then when I go to the places, then I find out the people associated with them. So oftentimes then it turned into poems about the people. And then I found out just so many interesting people I wanted to write about, then decided to work on another manuscript just about them. So that one is about maybe like halfway finished, and I'm actually working on another collection that will be finished before then. It's all in the voice of a Mennonite farm wife. That's kind of based on one of my aunts, and that one is just about finished, and then I'll get back to this one. But I kind of like having a couple different projects going on, so if I get kind of tired of one or stopped at one for some reason, I can go to another one. But I think I mentioned working with that community of Choctaw Indians, and I loved how they lived along a 12-mile road in the pine woods, very isolated, but just all along that road, they had stories connected to the landscape. They had stories connected to the springs. There was a pin oak that was still standing there, an old one, and Mr. Luther told me how his grandfather had, I think it was probably I can't remember exactly, his father or grandfather could remember when the slaves were free in a family. They slept under the trees on their way north, and he could even remember what they talked about. And so there were all these, and there were ghost stories and folk tales too that were like they really had happened at certain places along the road. And so I could see how great it is when you have those stories connected to a place. So I think that was part of the impetus of my project too. I wanted to know the stories of the landscape where I live too. And I think and also I was inspired too by the writings of Scott Sanders, and who writes so eloquently about the importance of place. And he's written about how when you know the stories of a place, you want to protect that place. And so I think that's really important. So, any other questions? Sherry?
I know at one point you were writing a collection of stories of, there was a woman, her name was Belle something or other.
Oh yes, I brought that poem along.
Would you read that poem?
Okay.
That is such a fabulous, interesting, and it's
Okay.
close to Halloween.
Well, yes, I guess, yeah, okay.
I'm sorry.
I need to say a little bit about her.
Yes.
She, Belle Gunness is also called the Bluebeard of LaPorte. See, some people are you're nodding your head. Yeah, she is a great person this close to Halloween. And I can't believe how people don't know about her, because you know how many people have heard of Lizzie Borden. Okay, that's probably because she came from New York, right? Yeah, okay, Belle Gunness LaPorte. But, Lizzie Borden killed her parents, which was terrible. But Belle Gunness may have killed as many as 40 men, and also her foster kids, and a couple husbands. And she was from Norway. She got married. She lived in Chicago. She married a candy maker, a candy storekeeper. So they had this store that sold candy in Chicago till it burned down, and they collected quite a bit of insurance money. And then, on the same day that two life insurance policies on her husband overlapped, he died. It was strange. And with that money, she moved to LaPorte, and it was a house I read that was like, had been a bordello, but it wasn't anymore. And she farmed. But she would also then write to these Norwegian bachelor farmers or widowers. And she was a very good writer. At the LaPorte, they have a large section of their museum devoted to her. And they have some of her letters to these men, telling them to bring everything they have. And they're just full of double entendres. I mean, really, I use one for the epigraph to the poem. But so she, well, you just go online and read about her, because I could go on and on. But she faked her own death, burned it, and with a couple of her kids, and made it look like she had died too, because she had lured a woman from Chicago down. I think I have that in my folder. And she was very, I think titles are hard to come up with, but I am very proud of the title of this one, Hourglass, because she was very proud of her hourglass figure. She's quite a large woman, but she did have an hourglass figure. And also you think of the black widow spiders have an hourglass, and when the men came to her house, they didn't have much time left. Okay, so the epigraph is Belle Gunness in a letter to Andrew Hegelin, LaPorte, Indiana, 1908. He was her last victim that she drew there, because Andrew's brother got suspicious and came to her door. And so then that's why she decided she needed to fake her death and get out of there. And they never found her. Okay, hourglass. Even as I put on weight, I keep my hourglass figure, ordering Jenny to pull the corset tighter. I know each lonely heart man's desire, to lock an arm around my waist, to promenade through town, our joint reflections smeared in the wavy glass. They are my mail-order brides, my blue-eyed blondes, my bachelor farmers with clumsy hands trembling to take the reins, my widowers with pressing flanks, homesick for Norway's forested shore. While they ache for the solace of my bosom, white fjords to fondle in their sleep, I cache the stacks of banknotes, sewn as I instructed, good and fast, inside their underwear. Fools, even drunk with lust, how can they miss the hint of strychnine in every word I write, unless in some dark dream they yearn for the gates of Niflheim, where Hela waits in a great stone bed. My papa, a stone cutter, chiseled that bedstead, block by block, as he farmed me out to neighbors, men who held me down behind a smoke shed. I bury each body part in oilcloth now, wrapped like cuts of sheep I indulged with a last caress. When my daughter was a child, I told her of a breastbone battered into a harp that sang of its own demise. Soon Jenny, who pilfers my lipstick, will join the company of bones that cry my name behind the shed. My dominion, like my accounts, grows more secure with each harvest. Those quivering wraiths who wanted me in this world will one day draw my bath and brush my unwound hair. They will take turns lying down beside me. Oh, my lovely concubines, so lovesick, even in death, their tongues will lick the sugar from my hands. So there's some bad people in mine. Hoosiers aren't all good. Any other questions?
I was wondering when that it became real to you that you were a poet. Was it always, since you were a child?
Sometimes
or-
I still have to wonder, every time I go to write a new poem, I think, am I a poet? Kind of continues, but
Well,
when I was a
that
kid,
was your genre, I guess.
Yeah.
I want to know that you decided that's what.
yeah, I mean, I wrote stories as a kid, really young, but then, and I wrote some poems for assignments that teachers gave, but when I remember when I first had the urge to write a poem that was an assignment given to me was when I was in 8th grade. Our family went to Somalia, and that was quite a change. We'd been living outside this little town of Markle in Wells County, and my dad was asked to fill in at a Mennonite hospital. They needed a doctor there. There wasn't any doctor for a year. So we moved to Jamama, which is near Kismayo, and so everything was very different. The landscape, we were surrounded by the Guban, like a desert area. They're nomads, and I'd never heard of Islam, and so it was like 99.9%, and it was, we didn't have any language. I didn't know the language. We didn't have any preparation, but it was a great experience, and I really felt I loved the desert area. I mean, I didn't walk through it or anything, but just looking at it, and so I started a poem on it that I worked on the whole year, and I didn't know much about poetry though, so it wasn't any good. And I also tried to write about the ocean. And then after I came back, I later years learned that Somalia is a land of poets. That they're coming. I was 13 at the time. I don't think I mentioned that. Their coming of age for the men and women traditionally has been to recite orally their poems, great poems, and also to create their own poems. So I like to think of kind of connected to that tradition, and of course, and and then when I came back went to high school, I was very fortunate that we had an artists in the schools that came, so I learned more what I needed to know for writing about, more sensory language and more similes and metaphors and that sort of thing, that I feel like Somalis were at the impetus to write. And I still am moved by landscapes. Mark?
Today, reading your blog, I learned I read other parts of your blog, but I didn't read the full biography there until today. And I learned that you studied with Rachel Lindsay's son at Goshen College, and that just really deeply intrigued me. And I wondered if you might speak a little bit more about his method of teaching poetry.
His class periods were poems.
Yeah.
They were. He'd bring his guitar, and he would. When we read our poem, he would set it to music and sing it, or he would link it to a myth. So my love of, he was a perfect teacher for me because I love myths and fairy tales, and so he didn't bring in poems for us to look like contemporary poet, and probably the most contemporary was William Blake. That's okay.
And his father would be more contemporary.
Yes. Oh, that's true. He did by his father
Yeah.
too. Yes, that's true. That's true.
But I mean, even
But
Rachel Lindsay's.
But when I went on to MFA, then at IU, I was very much behind. I did not know contemporary. I knew Robert Frost. I really had to catch up on poetry. I was behind. But I really enjoyed having him for a poetry teacher. He's a shipbuilder in Edisto Island. And I visited him one time. His wife, wonderful person too.
So it
And one
connected
of my
poetry
poems
with,
is dedicated to him.
with
in
the idea of
book.
physical labor. Was there a sense of making and
Yeah.
the craft of shaping that kind of transferred into his idea of the craft of poetry, I wonder?
I know he very much respected manual labor, and he was a carpenter, you know.
So it was with us.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And he would give us prompts, and he wouldn't give us like written comments. It would be kind of like we'd bring our poem to the class, you know, and he would do it off the cuff and respond to it.
Did you ever reflect on his father's suicide? I mean, that would be an odd thing, I suppose, to bring up in class. but-
He never talked
Yeah.
about that. I think he drank Lysol. Right?
Yeah.
Lysol.
Yeah, no, it's particularly,
You did.
Terrible.
Gruesome. Yeah.
and I mean, it was because he had this meteoric rise to fame, and then this, I mean, he's almost totally unknown on the American poetry landscape at this point. T.R. Homer's got a great essay about Lindsay.
Well, Nick is very intense, and some people probably, this Mennonite school, he didn't quite fit in.
Yeah.
Some people thought he was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
You know, he would just come back and do this short, was it 2 or 3 week term? I think it was like a 3-week term, you know, in the summer, and then go back to the island. Julia Kasdorf has written about it, and she used a little bit of my memories in her essay for the Mennonite Quarterly Review. So there'd be a good place to read about how he taught too, because she had him, and Jeff Gundy had him. So,
She came to Wabash. She won the GLC Indian Writers Award maybe 25 years ago, so that's when I got to meet her.
yeah, I love her poetry.
She's very good.
Yeah. But nature, of course, is really important to him. And he told me, like, he said something to me, like, the last day of class about how my duty or whatever was to defend the natural world. Whatever. He saw that as my vision.
Well, I don't want to cut this short, but first of all, thank you so much, Shari, for coming. Earlier in this group of programs we've done, we had Andrea Neal, and she went around the state visiting different kinds of sites and things, and she had a very different take from the way you travel the state, so it was kind of an interesting counterpoint, the way you can visit sites and remember people that have been important. So I just appreciate it. This was a fast evening. You were right. The time just flew by, I thought.
Well, yeah, I only
and I
think
think
about
all-
half the poems.
Well, I think of all the programs we've done, this is the one that Lou and Susan are probably looking down saying, gosh, I wish I was at that. I was in that crowd tonight, because it really was just a remarkable way to remember people. So thank you so much.
Oh, I wanted to mention, I have a website through the Sycamores, and I have a business card back there that has the website, and I interview an Indiana poet each month, and then also there's prompts, and the prompt for next month is to write a poem about an inheritance that you have, and the prompt's on there, you can find it.
That'd be a great project.
And
And we do have, Shari brought some books for sale, so she's here to sell and sign.